Hello everyone, my name is Alana Vassil. I am a health educator from the University of Florida and I am here today to teach you about assessing needs. When planning, implementing, and evaluating health promotion programs, there are many different steps you must take. Conducting a needs assessment is an important step in the planning process of every program. During the presentation, we will be discussing what a needs assessment is, different methods for gathering data for a needs assessment, how to conduct a needs assessment, and much more. After my presentation, I will be providing you with an activity that will help you better understand these concepts. Hopefully, after this lecture and activity today, you will have a better understanding of needs assessments and how to conduct one. Throughout the lecture and activity, we will be learning information that covers these different learning objectives. By the end of this presentation, you should be able to explain what a needs assessment is and why it is such an important part of the planning process, describe the difference between primary and secondary data sources, as well as identify which sources are primary or secondary data sources. You will then list 5 methods for collecting primary data, 3 methods for collecting secondary data, and identify the 6 steps for conducting a needs assessment. So, let's get started. What exactly is a needs assessment? Well, to address that, you must first understand what a need is. A need is defined as the difference between the present situation and a more desirable one. Needs can be expressed in many ways. Examples of this could be a need for better health, a need for access to health care, or a need for knowledge. Recognizing what the need is in a specific population is one of the most crucial steps in being able to plan and implement a program. If you do not have an understanding of the needs of a population, then you do not have a way to address these needs. This is where a needs assessment comes into play. A needs assessment is defined as the process of identifying, analyzing, and prioritizing the needs of a priority population. They can be very comprehensive or limited in scope. Performing a needs assessment is considered one of the most critical steps in the planning process. Why is it so important? Well, a needs assessment provides data to outline specific health problems, sets priorities for program implementation, and can establish baseline data for evaluation purposes. There are other reasons for their importance as well, but these are the most general ones. Without a needs assessment, the real needs of a population may not be identified or measured, and there may be resources being put to use for a program that is not backed up by data. This would waste resources, time, and money. 2 types of data are typically used with a needs assessment. One is primary data, which is data that you collect yourself to obtain specific information related and tailored towards your needs assessment. The other is secondary data, which is data that has already been collected by someone else and is available to you to use in your needs assessment. Some advantages of primary data are that it directly answers questions you create, and therefore the data you gather will almost definitely help you to identify the priority population's needs. You are conducting the research, so you will be able to use whatever methods you desire to gather your data. However, there are also disadvantages in that gathering primary data can be both expensive and time-consuming. Secondary data has its advantages in that the data already exists for you to use, so collecting secondary data will not be nearly as time-consuming or expensive as collecting primary data is. However, since you do not have a say in how the data was gathered, where the data was collected, and when it was collected, it could not relay to you the true needs of the population you are trying to create a program for. Research must be done when using secondary data sources to make sure you are getting the most accurate information possible in order to avoid creating a program based on incorrect data. There are many different methods that can be used to collect primary data. We are going to discuss some of the most commonly used primary data sources for planning health promotion programs. The first source we will discuss is known as single-step surveys. These are means of gathering primary data from individuals or groups with one single contact. Often these are in the form of written questionnaires and interviews. Written questionnaires are very commonly used as they have a large outreach with a low cost. However, there is often a low response rate with these forms of surveys, as well as the issue that questions cannot be clarified. In order to tackle these issues, the questionnaires must be easy to read, short, and have questions that are not difficult to understand or answer. This will create a better response rate. Interviewing is another form of single-step surveys that is commonly used. Face-to-face interviews have high response rates and may help to gather more complete data than other forms of interviewing, but they are time-consuming and often cost money because of traveling to interviews. Telephone interviews are similar in that they have the flexibility of questions, which helps to gather more complete data, but they do not have as high of a response rate as face-to-face interviews and are much more difficult to do now that people have cell phones and not landline phones. Electronic interviews are becoming more and more popular because of the growth of technology and the internet. These forms of interview have a low cost rate as well as almost immediate data when they are completed. However, they may lack anonymity and people completing them must have internet access. Multi-step surveys gather information from people through multiple contacts. This means that they may contact them to provide data on more than one occasion, unlike single-step surveys where it is just once. Multi-step surveys commonly use something called the Delphi technique during their data gathering. This is defined as a process that generates consensus through a series of questionnaires. The participants will be asked some general questions in the first questionnaire and then more specific questions once the responses are analyzed. This may continue for a few more rounds before the survey is considered complete. Community forums, also known as town hall meetings, bring people from a population together to discuss their problems and needs. Examples of these groups include community groups such as service or religious organizations. Gathering data can be both expensive and easy to get with these sources, but sometimes it's difficult to achieve good attendance in the meetings, or there may be issues with the people having different interests or motivations for being there that they want to discuss instead. Meetings are relatively straightforward, in that one would meet with a small group from the target population to find out what they think the community's needs and issues are. These can be flexible and have a low cost, but may have biased information due to participants not voicing their true feelings or limited participation by people. Focus groups are made up of a small amount of people that usually do not know each other. The idea of focus groups comes from group therapy, where an accepting environment is created so that people will feel more comfortable and thoughtfully answer questions. Focus groups for data collection need to be led by a skilled moderator in order to create the correct environment and get the desired information. They are difficult to lead because they involve a lot of planning and also a person who has been trained on how to lead one. Although focus groups usually create a lot of data, they are not randomized and therefore they do not represent the entire priority population. A nominal group process consists of a few knowledgeable representatives of the priority population who are asked to qualify and quantify specific needs of the population. They record their responses to a question without discussion among their group, and once they have all done this, they then share all their responses. There is a final vote at the end of the session where the needs of the population are ranked. This method is full of diversity and opinions and will give you insight into the needs of the population, but may suffer from bias. Observation as a form of data collection can be either direct or indirect. Direct observation involves watching a situation or behavior, while indirect observation involves observing outcomes of a behavior or asking others to report their observations. Observation can be time-consuming, especially when it is direct, because you have to physically go somewhere and watch or check up on people. It can also alter the people's behavior because they know they are being watched. For example, if you are observing the lunches of employees at work to gather data for implementing a healthy eating program, they may be very conscious of your observations and choose to eat different meals than usual on the days you come in. This can cause biased behavior, but if done correctly and unobtrusively, it may be an accurate representation. Self-assessments are the final form of primary data sources we will discuss. They involve assessments that one can do themselves, such as breast self-examinations and checking skin for skin cancer. They also include health assessments, which allow you to obtain group data that summarizes major health problems and risk factors in a population. Secondary data sources mainly include data collected by government agencies and non-government agencies and organizations, as well as from existing records and literature. Government agencies collect data regularly for various uses. You can gain access to this data by contacting the agency or looking for it on the internet or in a library. The data is collected at multiple levels, including the federal, regional, state, and local level. Examples of these agencies include the FDA, CDC, and the EPA, to name a few well-known ones. The data you access from these agencies is going to be accurate, but as with any secondary source, it may not be directly correlating with the true needs of the population. Non-government agencies and organizations, such as the American Heart Association and the American Cancer Society, are also regularly collecting data that you can gain access to. Many times, some of these organizations do needs assessments of their own that you can look at to help determine your priority population needs. Examples of data from existing records include looking at medical records to monitor blood pressure changes of people in an exercise program, or clinic records showing numbers of flu vaccinations over the years. Data can be used from some of these records in order to learn more about population needs, as long as participants give permission for the records to be used or the data is anonymous. These secondary sources are low cost and random, but it can be difficult to get access to some of the records because of privacy laws. Data from literature is a secondary source that can help you identify population needs. Current literature can be found in literature databases that are on computers, online, and in libraries. These databases can be used to find scholarly articles, journals, and books on specific topics that have been studied over the years. These are especially helpful if you're trying to develop a program for a topic that has been studied and written about extensively, because there's probably a lot of literature on it already. Gathering data from literature involves a process called a literature search. This is how you will search the database for the information you are trying to collect for your needs assessment. There are many online databases such as Medline, PsycInfo, and the Education Resource Information Center, known as ERIC. Sources can also be found from the World Wide Web through search engines such as Google and Yahoo. However, being cognizant that everything found online is not necessarily reliable and true is a must. Sources must be analyzed to make sure they are trustworthy and providing the most reliable data. We are now going to watch a short 5-minute video that will give you some tips for conducting a literature search. I hope that you now have a better understanding of what a literature search is and how to correctly conduct one. Now that we have thoroughly discussed what a needs assessment is, as well as the sources for collecting data, we need to address how a needs assessment is conducted. While needs assessments can be vastly different, with some being more informal and others being more formal, it is important to plan your needs assessment in order to have reliable information and solid data to rely on for your program. Therefore, following a 6-step process is important, especially for more formal needs assessments. Step 1 is to determine the purpose and the scope of the needs assessment. You need to know the goal of the needs assessment before you conduct it and what resources you will have access to. Do you have a wide range of resources and money at your disposal? Or do you have limited time and funding? Why are you performing this needs assessment in the first place? These are examples of some questions you should consider before conducting your needs assessment. Once you have identified your needs assessment purpose and scope, you'll be able to move on to the next step. Step 2 is gathering data. We extensively discussed the different ways there are to gather data and what sources are available. Now you must figure out which sources are going to be the best fit for your needs assessment. These sources need to be the ones that will give you relevant data, or data that will help you to identify the real needs of the population you'll be working with. It is recommended to first gather secondary data, starting from the level of the program and working higher. This means that if you were to be planning a local program, you would begin at the local level, and if there is not enough data at this level, then to move on to the state, regional, and then national level until you find what you are looking for. Once enough secondary data has been discovered, it's time to gather primary data to better understand the population needs and find out whatever information you did not get in the secondary data search. Whether you will use both primary and secondary data is of course dependent on the situation and the resources you have. Step 3 is to analyze all the data that has been collected. The goal of this is to identify any health problems in the priority population and determine which are the most important to address. This is often a challenging step to accomplish because their need may not be very apparent in all cases and the data can sometimes be difficult or confusing to compare. Prioritizing the problem is also challenging because it may have to be based on the resource you have to work with and not which need is the most important. There are different models, such as the Precede-Proceed model and the BPR model, that can be used to assist this process of setting priorities. Answering questions from the Precede-Proceed model can help to understand what the health problems are and to help you analyze the data you've gathered. The BPR model, which stands for the Basic Priority Rating Model, was created to help provide direction in priority setting. It involves rating different components of needs and putting these ratings into a formula to determine the final priority rating. This can be helpful if you are struggling to prioritize needs. Step 4 of conducting a needs assessment is to identify the risk factors linked to the health problem you identified in Step 3. What behavioral, genetic, and environmental risk factors are associated with the health issue you identified? Figuring out these risk factors will allow you to determine which factors can and need to be changed in order to decrease the health issue in the population. For example, your population may be employees of an office in town. The health issue is that the majority of them are overweight. When looking at their risk factors, you realize that there is no gym close to their office and only fast food restaurants. These would be the environmental issues, and the fact that they do not exercise or eat well are the behavioral issues. Knowing these risk factors and then prioritizing them allows you to determine what can be changed to decrease the health issue. Step 5 is to identify the program focus. This is where you will identify the predisposing, enabling, and reinforcing factors that have an impact on the risk factors. Finding these factors will help you to decide what needs to change and have a decision based on importance and any evidence that the change will be possible. During this step, there should be research into any existing health promotion programs in the community that exist. This will be able to make sure that you are not replicating another program that is going on because it would be a waste of effort and resources. Step 6, the final step in conducting a needs assessment, is to validate the prioritized needs. This is basically making sure that the need you identified as the most important priority is actually the need that needs to be addressed. If all the previous steps were done correctly, then the need should be validated. However, it is always important to complete the step and double check before possibly wasting any more resources. This can be done by rechecking your steps followed in the needs assessment, conducting a new focus group with individuals from the priority population to see their reaction to the identified need, and getting a second opinion from other health professionals. A health impact assessment is defined as a combination of procedures, methods, and tools by which a policy, program, or project may be judged as to its potential effects on the health of a population and the distribution of those effects within the population. It is a process that helps evaluate the possible health effects of a plan, project, or policy before it is implemented, and it can provide recommendations to increase positive health outcomes and decrease negative health outcomes. Why is this important? Well, health impact assessments could impact the focus of a needs assessment and are rapidly emerging practices. They put out a set of evidence-based recommendations that emphasize the positive aspects of a proposal and minimize any negative impacts on health. According to the World Health Organization, they are based on 4 values, which are as follows: democracy, equity, sustainable development, and ethical use of evidence. Guides for creating health impact assessments differ, but most follow these 6 major steps that are listed. Screening involves identifying plans, projects, or policies for which a health impact assessment would be useful. Scoping identifies which health effects to consider. Assessing risks and benefits involves identifying which people may be affected and how they may be affected. Developing recommendations involves suggesting changes to proposals to promote positive health effects or to minimize adverse health effects. Reporting is presenting the results to decision makers. And finally, monitoring and evaluating involve determining the effect of the health impact assessment on the decision. You can find more information about health impact assessments online at the CDC website. Throughout this presentation, we have learned a lot about assessing needs and how important it is. I've taught you effective strategies for conducting needs assessments, as well as different sources you can collect your data from. I hope that you have learned some valuable information from this presentation and that you will incorporate these strategies into needs assessments you conduct in the future. I am now going to hand out some papers so that we can use the rest of this class period to do an activity. The activity should take you between 20 and 25 minutes to complete, and it will further help you in your understanding of this topic. You will answer questions on information from this presentation and then read a related article and answer a few questions on that. Thank you so much for giving me your attention, time, and participation today.